Since we're all assembled, there's only a couple people from our coalition who are on the way, so they'll be walking in a little bit late. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. My name is IWOC. I'm a member of Decarcerate, Minnesota. And just about everybody here is familiar with the work that we're here to do and what we're about. So I'm just going to go ahead and frame the agenda for our time together this evening. Just as a little short overview, we want to take some commentary that we received from both Commissioner Schnell and Sakia Khan to heart, and use the first 30 minutes of our meeting today to hear the DOC's vision for addressing some of the issues that we hold dear around technical violations and revocations. We would then like to take about 50 minutes to talk about our short-term vision, our next steps for our campaign, and get some feedback from the DOC. And then we want to spend our final hour together just talking about next steps and having a Q&A to check on different issues that we asked the Commissioner and different Deputy Commissioners to look into for our constituents. So if that sounds fine with everybody, let's go ahead and get started by opening up the floor to you all. And if you also don't mind introducing yourselves, because I think we may have some first-time members here too, please go ahead.
Well, how about, if you don't mind, how about we just go around and just give everybody a chance to introduce themselves real quick.
Okay, does everybody want to just go ahead and say your name? And yeah, we just do it like that. So again, my name is Duwaba. Will Cooley.
Roxanne By.
Scott Good.
Lily Cooksey.
Rob Butler.
Noah Jefferson.
Lee Bush.
Paul Schnell.
Curtis Shanklin.
Michelle Smith.
Billy Wayne.
Bruce Swain.
Pamela Anderson.
Mark Miles.
Andy Pardon. Sorry, I didn't
Swain.
Oh.
With an S.
Daniel.
Oh.
David.
All right. First and foremost, I appreciate your time and you all taking time out of your day to come here and sit down with us as we continue on this path and this journey together to look at both policies, provision, and statutes that you all have brought forward with some of your concerns, and to give you all some insight to after taking in all the advice and all the solutions that you all have presented to us. And the discussions we've had around that so that we can look at what remedies are feasible here on the short term and then on the long term so that we can meet those needs that you all have that are essentially the same goals and the same needs that we have as well. In regard to we'll start talking about the technical violations. And so what we were able to do is have internal discussions surrounding your concerns in regard to those technical violations. And so I think that some of the things that came up, and it might have been in one of your first meetings, was a discussion around taking into consideration the impact that those have on certain processes, but also having us taking a look at that to see what the impact that has on family, employment, and housing. And so those are things that we heard. And so those are things that we have now taken into consideration and then are going to look to get that not just done in policy, but to look to get that established in statute through the legislative process. So we have taken those things and we'll add those within that will now be a part of a high priority of our legislative agenda to add those considerations that you have brought forward in regard to the technical violations. When you all talk about those things, I just want you all first and foremost to know that those collateral consequences that come with it are things that are important to us as well to take a look at, particularly when we're talking about technical violations and revocations that are a result of that, and making sure that we are taking into consideration the impact that does have on not only the person himself, but the impact that might have on their employment that they might have had up until that point. Not only that, the impact that has on family, taking into consideration that what if this person is a single parent and those type of things. And also on housing. What does that mean for having a technical violation, and what type of inroads or what type of hurdles that might present for housing. I think one of the things that we've talked about extensively is the process that we are trying to take on when we're trying to get these things moved. And I think for us, it's important for these things to be institutionalized and sustainable. As you all know, we're only guaranteed, well, and not even that, because to be honest, the commissioner could decide tomorrow that I'm up out of here. So tomorrow's not, and the governor, well, so tomorrow's not guaranteed. So it's one thing for us to change those things in policy, to then only have you all to be coming back, which would be in partnership with us, to be coming back in 2 to 3 years. And if a new administration comes in who's a lot more conservative and decides, you know what, I like what they did, that was kind of cute, but that's not the direction that we would like to go. So then they completely change all of that. All that does is then present us to be right back here again, looking to say, okay, now how do we now form a coalition to address those issues again? So when we talk about trying to do things through the legislative process, understand it's not to try to delay or to try to put up unnecessary obstacles. For us, it's about how do we institutionalize these concerns that we have and make it sustainable so that they live on past us, and so that not only for the people who are experiencing these issues right now, but for when their kids come along, and so on, that these things can actually live on. So those are the things that we heard from you and took into consideration around the technical violations. In regard to the, I believe it was in regard to the revocation process, we were actually just having an in-depth discussion about that and what that means when it, in regard to what it pertains to as far as hearings and releases. And so one of the things that I think that we are going to look at, and I think the commissioner, if I mess up some of this language, let me know. The PR discussion that we just had is looking at how do we create a process to which there's a more of a framework for how does a violation or so on not turn into a warrant that then leads to a revocation or a restructuring. And so one of the things that we've just got done discussing is what can we put in place, not only on the policy side, but what can we propose as far as through legislation that would be something sustainable to remedy that.
I just think the key thing there is really, we feel like we're meeting with March next week, which is all the treatment providers, to talk about what are the options we have around using community-based resources for whether it's treatment stuff, or so that ultimately what ends up happening is we're not forced to issue warrants on people. We can have people get a CD evaluation and move as quickly as possible back into treatment if ultimately that's the need or risk that they have. We're looking at things like we're looking at our CIP criteria. What are the criteria? One, to get in. Two, the way much of that criteria is written today, it establishes a pretty tight kind of tight parameters around. It says if there are multiple violations, that is a grounds for revocation. It talks about the fact that in the supervision of people, the first objective that the legislature has in that law is that the punishment of the person who is subject to that is in fact one of the statutory objectives. We don't think that reflects good corrections policy by any stretch of the imagination. And that's one of the things that we seek to change in the law. So changing the law on these things become important. Things like just a simple little, it's not as simple as it sounds, but things like being able to use detox admissions for people that, our agents go out and they find somebody who's intoxicated or whatever. We would much rather detox somebody, which is about health and welfare and safety, than about taking them into custody. But right now, we don't have the authority. Agents do not have the authority to detox somebody. That's the only people that do is a health official or a peace officer. And so we think that there's some statutory language that we can change that ultimately provides that and look at those types of issues as a health issue, as a chemical dependency issue, as opposed to the more traditional focus of we lock them up. The CIP violation element process stuff, it becomes a huge issue, and we have to put this in context of the way the program was established.
Yeah, just wanted to say that there's about 2 minutes left for.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead. We'll go, because I mean, we'll move, because I'm policy focused, and that's where this is at.
Yeah, are there any final points that you would
No,
want to make
we're
just
good.
to sum up the plan?
No, we're good.
I want to hear what you have to say about this.
Me
too.
Yeah, so do we. Yeah, just letting you know that.
All right, so on the CIP front, that ultimately, the way the program, what's happening today is, what I think, and again, I'm not supportive of it, because I think what happens is the parameters become focused on pure compliance, and ultimately doesn't address look, many of the people that are on CIP did so well in that program, right? While they were in the camp, they did incredible. They loved it. They talked about the structure. They did great. But a 6-month intervention does not change thinking patterns and those types of things that ultimately can create the problems that people face in the community. And for us to think that a 6-month program is going to change what oftentimes for people is a history of whatever that was that ultimately caused some of these challenges, it's not realistic. And so, but in order to change it, the law was written as a way of saying, you want all that time off? You are still serving your prison sentence, and that's how CIP was designed. We would like to see CIP and the back end of CIP really be more of a supervision model, more of a correctional support and intervention model to support the kinds of efforts that started in CIP while they were in the camp, as opposed to focusing on you didn't comply, you're in violation and we jack you. And I think the reality becomes this stuff is grounded in statute, and it was the way the programs are designed. And in order to really change that, we need to go back and I think have some redesign and take punishment out. It talks about take out the options around violation. When there's a violation, it reduces the hearing officer's authority to have a broader range of options because of the way the statute's written, and that's specific to CIP. So these things are things that we hear you, we agree, but in order to make those changes, we need to go to the legislature, and I think we'll get there. I think we can make a compelling case to do that.
And I think, I'll just add one thing. We always talk about, in regard to the system and the structures, acting according to exactly how they were designed and how the system acted exactly how it was designed to do, and producing the outcomes from the infrastructure on the outcomes that it was designed to achieve. And so in order to change that, which is why we are so heavy talking about doing this through policy on the legislative front, because if you want to change the fundamental way that the system operates, then that has to take into fact of changing things through statute and law that set the foundation for the way that the system currently operates and the services and the outcomes that it gets in return. And so again, simple policy changes will feel, if feasible, feel good in the short term, but those things don't become sustainable or don't become institutionalized. And for a lot of those policies, we have to change the foundation of it, which is the statute part of it, that has to be cured first, before then we can change the in-house policy that correlates with that statute or law.
Unless there are any final comments that y'all would like to make, can we open it up to discussion?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, let's do that.
So, on one hand, we think this is a wonderful sign of progress. On the other hand, when we've reached out to our legislative allies, they've told us that nothing will get through the Senate Judiciary Committee. And last year, there was some very sensible bills that got waylaid in that committee. And this is coming from Republicans and coming from Democrats. What makes you think, and we'd also like to see what the specific bills are, because most of the stuff that's out there right now is on probation, not on parole.
Right.
So we'd like to see the specific bills. But what makes you think that a certain person who's on the Senate Judiciary Committee, who you probably know, will move anything forward?
The same thing, if I could ask, I would say the same thing that has you all sitting here, that you brought to our attention, to get us to move on certain things. I agree with you. I mean, I think that's I think that is a stance that a lot of people probably will be taking on from an optics standpoint, to say that nothing's going to move through the Senate Judiciary, or everything is dependent on one particular senator for anything to move. However, as you all, many of you spent a lot of your lives doing from a grassroots effort, when people are engaged, when people are consistently putting pressure on people to do what is right, I'm not one who takes the pessimistic view to say that one person is beholden and can't be moved. So in that case, we should then not follow through on our efforts to present legislation, meaningful legislation, that we feel is in the right direction, that is going to remedy a lot of these issues. Because if that's the mindset to take, then the question becomes, then what are we essentially doing here? And so I'm of the belief that when we present sensible legislation that is followed through with the community's voice and with the community's effort, that's how you get those people to move, and how you get those people to take those sensible reforms that we have had and actually make sure those things can pass out of committee and get into law.
I think the second thing is, we're at a spot where we are going to, the message really is, and I want to be clear about this strategy here, it's you either buy more capacity, you build more prisons, or you start to get smart about the policies that we have in place that better manage the system. I don't care on either side of the aisle, when you start talking about the economics of things, the economics of bricks and mortar and building more beds does not make any sense. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. And that's where we are. We are at capacity. We don't have any more capacities, and it would be crazy to build them. So I think ultimately, this is the thing that we, and I say we as a collective community, the folks in the system and administration need to say that this is the place where we find ourselves.
I think we agree with you on that completely. However, there were some very common sense measures put forward last year. For instance, the probation cap was a common sense measure that a certain person shot down only because he does not want to see victories for the Walz administration. And now Governor Walz has written this article in Time magazine talking about parole and probation being one of his main goals. That probably
with a Republican, I might add.
With a Republican, yeah. Well, we all, yeah. But I'm afraid, right? And so I think everyone, we talked about this on Sunday, everyone agrees, and we will support you on this completely. We want to see the bills. We'll do as much as we're going to Maple Grove, and we're going to try to convince this person. However,
and I think the counties are going to go along with this as well.
Yeah. However, the executive branch is a co-equal branch of government. Mm-hmm. Aren't there things you can do as a commissioner? And when you're talking about culture change, that's not going to come from the legislature. That's going to come from you convincing parole officers that we need to shift from punishment to success.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So So there's nothing you guys can do as an executive branch.
There are process things that we are looking at, that we are exploring the full implications from a due process standpoint and from that we want to, because we have to walk through the whole system, and we've asked for some Court of Appeals kind of assessments by our general counsel, just to see what the range of options we have are. There's certainly, we can look at some things around. Even saying, look, we're not going to bring back. We can change thresholds. We can look at some of those things. The one thing that we also know is that we want to make sure that oftentimes we are in a place where we can address the risk and needs. And I keep saying this, and I know it makes people crazy, but I can tell you that even talking to the groups, the treatment programs and the mental health providers and March and all these different organizations are saying, look, we're here, we can do it. We've had some success with DHS funding streams now, being able to do that. It actually reflects good public policy, because remember that if people are medical assistants and are out in the community, they can access those funding streams as opposed to using DOC, which does not have access to any of that federal funding. So it provides some options. Our treatment team and reentry folks have put out an RFP to treatment providers, mental health and CD, and because this was a change in some recent rules that allowed those providers to be able to. We want to get to a place where an agent could say to a client who had a relapse, which is again 60+% of them. Mm-hmm. Here's a list of 5 providers who will see you within 48 hours, 72 hours. And you pick, because we can't pick for them which program. We ultimately want people to get in to address their needs. They can get an assessment, and if that assessment warrants outpatient treatment or inpatient, whatever that is, those programs, any of those programs can provide that resource. To us, that makes good sense and good policy, and we want to move in that direction. So that RFP is out in the street now, and they're collecting those, and we're encouraging. When I go to the March meeting on Monday night, next Monday night, they have a big conference here for all the statewide providers. That's going to be one of the things I'm going to push, is make sure you respond, make sure you become involved in this, because where we need them is in the metro certainly, but we also need them greatly outstate.
Please, yeah.
I know there's a therapist or psychologist/therapist who questions a lot of the practices being done right now with some of these groups that you just talked about, as far as the treatment programs. And if you want, I could get her some of your contact information.
Okay. Mine?
So, yeah, whoever wants to take it, I'll get it to you. And you guys can chat and talk about what her concerns were when she really looked into some things that are going on in the treatment place.
You mean treatment within the...
Outside, I think it's treatment that's like out here in the community for people that are required to do it. Plus, some of the community things that I've heard from people that state that a lot of these guys are just in it for money versus treatment. And some of the people that come out of the treatment, they will joke around about, oh man, we just say this and this to get past this, and it's not really effective. There's other community organizations, as some of you know, and other things that have such a big impact that goes far beyond some of these traditional treatments that are out there.
And I think your point, and I think we agree. We're also looking at, we really are seeking kind of the culturally responsive treatment path, and that's important.
And the community-based options, particularly around those, when we're talking about particular things around mental health, chemical dependency, having those options that are right there in the community. It shouldn't be a reason that you have to be incarcerated to receive the services that you need, but also for those who are going back into the community, that you're actually getting the services too while you're in-house, that is preparing you as you re-enter back into your community and having that safety net and that plan. So all of that plays a role in contingent upon having those community resources that are available. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I think you had a question. She had her hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to just say, I'm speaking from experience. My daughter's in Shakopee, and I believe there's a fair amount of inmates, at least from my experience with her, that have been revoked on their CIP release conditions for things that don't include some of these violations. Like there was no law broken, there was no violations of chemical abuse or substance abuse of any kind. It's part of the conditional release, and it's become too discretionary, and there's too much subjectivity given to the agents, at least from my experience. So the power that these agents have or they take on has become a very serious problem.
Yes.
And they determine, you're going back. I don't like you. You have a personality conflict. You think you're to this or to that. But that part of this whole process has become very, very significantly adversely affecting some of these gals that have gone out and they haven't broken any laws, and now they're going back. And then there's retaliatory measures that are taken also. And nothing is consistent. The consistency from even from the metro to outstate is huge. It's huge. There's agents, just let me finish. There's agents, please, in the metro that might come see, a released person 4 times a day, 3 times a day, every day, a day and night at their work, on their 2-hour shopping spree, come and have them go to the bathroom and do a test. Still never failed anything. And there's outstate individuals that they don't see an agent for a week or 2. They call every day like they're supposed to. Nobody comes to see them. The other huge issue is there's absolutely metro people have to have pre-approved visitors. Outstate people don't. So if a person you happen to see on the street walking, you're out shopping, you go to church, you're in a parking lot, and somebody comes talk to you and they're sitting in your car or visiting with you, my daughter was violated. Others have been too.
Yes.
Because they're not pre-approved visitors.
Yes.
When outstate people don't have that requirement, well, first of all, it's ridiculous. But besides that point, so the difference, there's no consistency, and then they get put in, and then they all talk, and then the animosity starts flying because that happened to you, and how come not me, and so then it makes it worse. And I have to go back to your point about the legislative rulings and requirements and so forth. For me, my opinion is it starts with rules. Rules are huge. Policy is huge, huge. If you've developed a good policy, it will turn into, or could turn into, a very effective legislative initiative or statute, but statute and rule. The rules and policy can start here, and they should start here. We don't have to worry about the legislature. Let's start with really good policy. And these things that are making these kids or these people violate are so unreasonable that we've got to really seriously take a look at this, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. I don't think you hear any of us sitting here say that what you're saying, that there's no agreement with that you're completely way off base. And that's something, those are things that we have listened to and heard and even did some looking into specifically ourselves, and looked at the genesis of the CIP, the foundation of that program, the intent of it, and then from our vantage point think, okay, what do we have to do in place to change not only the mindset about how we administer CIP, but also looking at what now becomes the intent of it and how do we change that. And just how we looked at the technical violations and say, what are the collateral consequences from what, if we make a change, we also have to internally evaluate, okay, what does this mean? Because if we make a change, does this mean now we need more resources? Does this mean we need more agents? So those things that we have to take into consideration. And also when we're talking about changing the rules and stuff, we also have to make sure that fits in whatever statutory guidelines or restrictions, that whatever policy we put in adheres to that.
Right.
But I hear you. I don't think you would hear any of us sitting that you're all based on what we see. We don't see any of that happening.
And it's common sense, and I'd like for it not to take forever and ever, amen, to get something accomplished.
Right.
Everybody everywhere in the whole country forgets about common sense and what makes sense and what we can do today, not next year. There are things we can do now to positively affect the integrity of the program, the integrity of the system, the integrity across the board. And that's what I would like to see, because we can do things now. Simple things that make a big difference in the lives of a lot of people. So,
I like it. Sister, what's your name again? I'm sorry.
sorry,
Yeah.
Pamela Anderson.
So I think a lot of what, almost 100% of what Sister Pam just shared is exactly what we're campaigning for too. And so I want to take Sister Pam's question, I want to drill a bit down deeper into it and talk about it in terms of tactics and collaboration moving forward. I also would share, since y'all are interested in partnering with culturally responsive or culturally rooted health services or human services providers. I was just at a gathering of culturally specific health services providers today, and one of the issues that came up was that county human services offices are getting more funding than they are, and so they don't have the resources to build capacity to serve larger populations that they're focused on. And so it might be valuable if the DOC could also advocate for getting more funding allocated towards culturally responsive providers. Also, y'all should expect some opposition in terms of insurance billing policies, and they may also need you to advocate for them in that arena too. I think there's a Health and Human Services Billing and Finance Policy Committee that y'all may need to start building a relationship with. But now to the specific question. I think in terms of supervising agent discretion and intervention policy, specifically what it means to start with policy rather than legislation. What our experience of the current policy is that the default intervention that a supervising agent will make is to revocate and incarcerate. And so one of the things that I'm personally wondering, but I think is relevant to the group, is what leeway do you have in the short term to change the default intervention from revocation? And what are some of the options available?
So this has there's a variety of elements to this, right? And because you could talk about different people and different programs, but I want to just, when I go to this talk about policy, because I agree with you 100%. The requirements, this is challenge incarceration, right? The Commissioner shall administer an intensive structured and disciplined program with high levels of control, of offender accountability and control, and related consequences for failure to meet behavioral expectations. The following goals: to punish and hold the offender accountable, to protect the public safety, to treat offenders who are chemically dependent, and to prepare offender for successful reintegration. The program shall contain, so these are things that ultimately really limit our flexibility. And that doesn't mean that we aren't, so here's one of the things, we're doing some things even from a value standpoint internally. One of the things we just communicated we haven't even communicated to the staff yet or to any of our partners, but I'll share it with you, but it's just one element of it. We did a bunch of guidelines. The guidelines around expectations and standards and that kind of stuff of what we value. And one of one of those values is really about that we want to use the least restrictive intervention to achieve the intended objective, right? And if the intended objective is to address thinking or behavior or relapse or whatever the issues are, ultimately that's what we want or need to do, and so we're trying to frame up this kind of notion so that it drives real practice of saying, to what extent did you use the least restrictive option to achieve the intended objective? How are we addressing? And I think there's no doubt that when we start looking at some of the strategies around and we've drawn even from a supervision standpoint, from an agent standpoint, into some of these programs. Ultimately, the program, as Curtis points out, is acting very much as it's designed, and we need to change that. And so we're trying to provide some guardrails, but some of these things become a challenge.
I think one of the main things I would point out in that framing of what you just shared, though, is that when we discuss public safety, it seems like we're focusing on public safety as it pertains to the general public, and we're excluding people who are impacted by the system and their needs for public safety. And we're not acknowledging that under the current system, as you shared, Curtis, that intense supervision is a public safety risk for people who have already done their time and are now trying to serve out the remainder of their sentence in community. And so, with regards to CIP and how you have different statutory regulations that you have to meet, that makes sense. But there's also statutes that give you a lot more leeway in dictating how those legal requirements are met. And I also just want to point out that we keep bringing up CIP, but we're also not talking about HRU.
Right.
And that's the main thing that is feeding CIP. And so what I would want to hear specifically is, what leeway do you have to implement immediate changes to the default intervention policy of the HRU process? For example, instituting appeals process. And specifically, why haven't the least restrictive options been applied within the HRU process?
So this is all brand new, right? We haven't even laid this out yet to anybody else, but that one provision. But when you start to look at the HRU process and the hearing process, I asked the question about delegated authority, right? So who's authority, by whose authority, and this whole notion of delegated authority. So I asked the question, can I take away delegated authority? Because that's really, what ends up happening is delegated authority means that in the statute, it says that the commissioner has all this authority, correct? And then through delegation, that authority gets provided to these folks sitting here and others. And so I asked the question about, if I wanted to just shift that delegated authority, and can I do that? And the truth of the matter is, the delegation of authority is done in rule. It's not something that I came in and said, it's going to be, Curtis's delegated authority is this. It's grounded in rules. Okay. Rules have process to change. So in other words, we can't independently change the rules. We have public input, because that's essentially creation of law without using the legislature. And so that it's trust me, I'm learning a lot about just what all this stuff means in terms of my ability to grant authority and my authority to take it away. And so that really becomes one of those key features. So now what we're doing is having the conversations about when we look at the hearing process itself, whether it's issuance of warrants, whether it is they use that checklist, and that has driven it down by about 400 a day, between 400 and 500 a day. But now we're at that threshold where we're not seeing any more reduction. And so this is one of those places where, again, I just asked them to pull 6 months of all violations, all ISR and all CIP violations. I want to look at them. We want to, just evaluate the full range of what those cases were, and what drove them, and then what interventions had been attempted before, if at all. So that's the answer to that question. It's not as simple as.
And I'll just add this, because one of the things we can't do is that those things, all that you brought up, I sit here and I'm thinking about it, because these are things that we've specifically talked about as far as from a policy standpoint, from a rule standpoint, statute, what can we do within our authority to change it? We've come up with some ideas. But at the same time, it's hard for us to also come here and say that this is something that specific that I'm particularly looking at changing when that hasn't been discussed or brought internally. And this probably wouldn't be the right venue for that to be rolled out without it being talked about and discussed internally with all those people who's going to directly impact it. If that makes sense, that might be changes to the way, particularly if we're talking about completely changing the core and the foundation and structure of how a whole specific program is administered. And so just make sure that, I just want to make sure that we had that caveat thrown in there.
Hey, y'all, I just want to make sure to keep us kind of on schedule. So if possible, if you have a question that you want to ask now, could you write it down and then we'll ask it again in that final Q&A session that we have. And then if there are any questions that are relevant to what was just shared that you would like to ask, let's prioritize those questions. Is that all right? That's okay? Okay.
I have a question for you, Mr. Commissioner. So what you just said about looking at the hearing, shouldn't you start below that and start looking at the probation officers themselves?
Absolutely.
Right.
Who do the inmates or people on parole complain to when they feel like they're violated, or they feel like they're too much, they've talked to their counterparts, that's because that's what they do, they're people.
Sure.
And vice versa, like.
So one of the challenges, so I know that even on the list here is the questions about due process, right? The lack of due process. And yet, the due process stuff has been through a lot of appeals over the course of time. The HRU process, because it's an internal hearing, has been subjected to even Supreme Court review, and deemed to meet the necessary requirements of due process. Now, again, I'm not here to defend the system. I'm here to say, because I think there's a due process question and there's a fair process question. And I think due process is met. People are provided with the opportunity to have legal representation. People are provided to present evidence. They are, and they sign waivers. Oftentimes is what ends up happening in some cases. But then there is the hearing officer gets to make determinations based upon that. So that's due process is met in terms of the way it's structured. I'm not arguing that it's the best system.
No, it's
Can I
not.
just ask a question? Commissioner, I'm from NPR. Basically, can you just give me any statistics? Because I've been looking at just the hearing part of it, and I'm not seeing many statistics where the actual evidence that's taken in by the probation office is overturned by the probation hearing. I'm seeing whatever evidence is coming in.
Right.
Is then just reviewed, and then whatever the recommendations of the probation service is then looked at by the judge and then offered and followed through. So it doesn't seem like there is a different as an appeal system, and I'm just curious if you have any evidence that I haven't got to say that, hey, there's how many appeals were actually carried through, how many weren't. I don't have that kind of.
Yeah, I can't give you an answer on appeals. I can tell you that there are restructures that occur prior to a determination of a violation. So, and I don't know what that number looks like, but you can issue a warrant for somebody, you can restructure, and there was no determination of a violation, and they weren't sent back. So they were brought in, restructured, and put back in the community. So I don't know what the exact number is, but that's the alternative. It's not, in many of those cases where I think that's where you would see that the HRU push for a restructure.
Hey, Mr. Snow, I've been through technical violations myself, not to try and have a conversation, but those little restructures are just, they put those on you like candy.
Yes.
You know, and they just hand them out. And what I think should be done is that should be taken up to the next level. It should be a restructure, but there should be a review by HRU to see whether that should be a valid restructure or whether that should be, let's just get the frick over our idiocracies and move forward. And then, you know, if there's a valid reason for restructure, then so be it. But they put those things on you. Per se, I was gonna get a computer, and my agent told me I couldn't. So I went, okay. So I withdrew my money from the deposits, and I said, I'm not buying it anymore. Well, my mom bought it for my dad, okay, and she was gonna allow me to use it. And I was using it, but she purchased it, and it wasn't anymore my issue. I took my money off, I followed my instructions. They come over to my house, they said, well, you got this computer, and whatever. I'm like, I took my deposit off of it, I'll wash my hands of it, I'll move on. I'm like, I followed my directions. Well, I got a restructure for buying a computer I didn't buy. And it's like, that's just one of those things. They're gonna sit there and stack that crap up against you, and then they're gonna keep on using it.
Two kinds of restructures, just the two kinds of restructures. One is an agent restructure, and they have the authority to restructure. And there are restructures that happen in HRU, and I think this is one of those places where I think clarity around, what constitutes a restructure, I think, is another issue. We have to clarify what are how do we establish those conditions, and what are we meaningfully trying to accomplish? It's a legitimate question.
Okay, you're talking about legislator and all this stuff that's going to take so much time, and the hearings and the PSI agents, and I'm so with her, okay, because there's got to, the hearing is closed. My son did nothing wrong. I have 7 people with me in this meeting. He had support. He was doing everything right. He talked very highly of the boot camp program. We did our Bible study every morning. He was going to the NA meetings. Okay, here's where your PSI agents and their creative writing come into play. He goes to an NA meeting. He's not allowed to be around felons. How many felons are at an NA meeting? Okay? Be real.
Exactly.
So he runs into one who he knew in past years, and I helped this young man with his woman and his child. They stayed in my house for a week. They talked. He, as a matter of fact, when they broke into the small groups, my son took control of the small group and kept everyone on topic. Okay? He was working his plan, okay? But the gentleman that he knew at the meeting, they communicated about going to another meeting, and he sent him a picture of his daughter. And they said, what are you doing with pictures of an underage child on your phone? They were sending me the picture to show me how beautiful she had been because we knew them. He met him at an NA meeting. So here's his creative writing. He's using his NA meetings to hang out with felons.
I'm not going to defend anything.
This is.
Yeah, I don't think.
But my son made his appeal. Barbara heard about this PSI agent and stopped me after the meeting when I was leaving last time and said she was gonna look into all of this, but when I called her, she has not returned one phone call I have made, okay? And these people, all I want you to do is
All right, so
commit to
You
reopening.
talk to me after.
I want
about-
his appeal.
You want to
be
talk to
looked
me,
at.
talk to me afterward.
I want my son home.
You talk to me afterward and we'll look at it.
Okay, just to close out this part of our time together, I want to acknowledge that the bureaucracy that we are fighting to change is infuriating and crazy making. What it sounds like is that y'all, as policymakers, have basically y'all are the left hand that cannot control the right hand, which is the people working under you who enforce and implement the rules and the policy, or at least at this point.
Accountability for them.
Exactly.
Accountability.
For HIU.
Yep. And perhaps the ways in which this bureaucracy makes us crazy and also makes us stomp down doors in Capitol Hill is purposeful. But also I think for our partnership to be more functional, it would be useful to us as grassroots organizers to know who beneath you at a level that is charged with implementation and enforcement of the rules, we can also put pressure on, because you know that our line, our angle is administrative advocacy, not strictly legislative advocacy, which is your track. And so I think for us to reduce how infuriating these meetings are, we need to know who at a community level, at the level that interacts with our families, who can we hold accountable, who can we advocate to, who can we put pressure on. And if that's something that is within your power to give, please do so. And if not, tell us who to go to. But just for the close of this section so that we can keep the agenda moving on, and maybe this is something that we can revisit because it seems like you got something.
No, I was just gonna say, I agree, but I would also say that, I would appreciate if you continue to hold us accountable, because I wouldn't say that it's not necessary, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the left hand that can't control the right. I'm going to say this for all of you, and I mean that you have expressed, the issues that you have had, and I firmly believe that there is some validity to that, which is why we are here in this space to say, okay, what solutions can we come up to remedy those? But it also just can't be on an individual basis, because there are others who are facing those same issues. And so how do we look to make changes? Again, that's not just going to be a benefit to single people, but it's going to be a benefit to everyone who comes along after that. And so we're here because we hear you. And when it comes to the culture change, that is something too that it was in our purview to continue to work on the chip at and change. I understand the sense of urgency that you all have. We have that sense of urgency too. If we didn't have it, we would not be here. It's just, I'm going to continue to say this. These things do not happen overnight. I know everyone would like them to, but these things just do not happen overnight. That does not take away our sincerity to try to remedy these issues.
I gotta interrupt you because we gotta keep going. We're not trying to question your sincerity. We're not trying to question your understanding, but we do need shit to happen overnight. And that's what we came to do.
I get that, but hold on. I'm gonna let you, but at the same respect, like we talk about this with the same thing, respect thing. So if you want to, can I finish? I get that, but can I finish, young brother? Because if you was in the middle of talking, I would give you that respect and would give you that time to let you finish your thought. I wouldn't cut you off like that. So what I'm going to, like as I was saying, is that all of these issues and the things that you are bringing forward to us, there is validity to that. We are in this space because we care about finding solutions to those issues. Because not only are they a benefit to you all, they are also a benefit to our organization and to the way we are going about and we would like to be doing business. So we share these concerns that you have, which is why, again, we are in this space to come up with solutions, to take your thoughts and your concerns into our calculus when we are trying to make changes that is going to accommodate not only you all, but us too, because we feel like we are on this path and this journey together. I now,
All right, we're gonna start with our solutions then, and you guys have read them many times, so we're not gonna go too in depth. So we're just we got 4, we're gonna hit on them, Steph and I are gonna hit on them. So, we understand what you're talking about legislatively. However, we also know that having too much faith in the legislature is naive.
Absolutely.
It's not the DOC that got us here, it's the legislator and their hysterical reaction to crime. If we go back all the way to Orville Plum, he was always saying, put the brakes on things. The DOC has always said, put the brakes on things. It's the legislature that got us in this mess and prosecutors. So let's not have too much faith in the legislator to fix these things as well. This is the job of the executive branch to make some of these changes. And we're talking about culture change, that comes from you. The legislature making a couple changes, taking out the word punishment, for instance, is not going to change the culture of the DOC and not going to change the culture of the DOs. That comes from leadership. And we've seen this in other states. Well, other states, they went from being good social workers in the 1970s to carrying guns and thinking themselves as law enforcement in the 1980s and 90s. We need to shift that back to this mindset of success. One way we can do that is by our first proposal here. And this is something that actually, when probation did this, from what we understand, this came from probation officers themselves. They're the ones that made this change from a warrant to a summons because they realized we're disrupting people's lives by issuing a warrant. We think this is something you can do through a rule change, not through the legislature, to switch from a warrant to a summons. And it is something you can do pretty quickly because you realize it's the right thing to do. Probation's already done it.
And just to be clear, it's already something that HIU determines. This doesn't even require a rule change, it just requires for the HIU to do its job and to say, no, we're not gonna issue a warrant 100% of the time. We're gonna actually look at what someone's being asked and only issue a warrant if it's necessary. So
We are working on some changes here.
Okay. Can we have a timeline on that?
Realistically, it's going to be end of the year before we're there. We're just, that's just the way it is. We feel like this is one of those places we have to bring people along. We have systems that we have to look at, and we're exploring kind of what that looks like, because we want to minimize the use of warrants as much as we can. I mean, and we're doing, I think I mentioned last time, we're doing a project in Ramsey, which is really focused, is a very different focus than has traditionally been the case in violations.
Real quick before we get to number 2, I just want to echo that I think one of the reasons that stress and tension is so high in this room is this idea that we, our partners, these other ghosts that I think you might have in law enforcement or these other different institutions haven't been at the table. Like, you've come to every meeting, which is great. You've just started coming last meeting. But I think that's what's upsetting is this idea that, oh, there's all these other partners we have to talk to. There's all this other input we need to get. Why haven't they been here the entire time? I think that's why people are feeling this sense of like urgency and just frustration because you've done your due diligence in showing up, but you haven't brought all these other people and all these other attitudes and other opinions to the table. And so now we're still in the space of like, oh yeah, I gotta make sure all this stuff is cool with these other partners. So I just wanna, I'm pretty sure that's why a lot of people are upset.
No, the tension is because in the meantime, my son still sits in jail as I come to meeting after meeting after meeting.
So does mine.
Like, it's great that you've been able to come to meetings, it's great that you started coming, but it sounds like there's other people that should have been in the room for quite a while. But I'm gonna get to number 2. The biggest thing we're talking about, the huge thing, is HRU hearings with no real due process, right? So you have talked about there have been some changes and there's been some things that you all have done on your end, and that's great, but we're still seeing this success rate of appeals being 0%. What we're asking is a tool to ensure that that there is some sort of process for people to use that actually matters for them, so that this person isn't coming saying, I had all these evidence, I had all these character witnesses, I had all of these different things that I brought to the appeals process, and they were just thrown out, dismissed, unheard.
And the hearing is closed.
Right.
The hearing to throw them back in jail, that's a closed hearing.
Mhm.
The only evidence presented was from the dirty PSI agents, the lying, dirty PSI agents.
We want to emphasize shifting the standard of evidence from clear and convincing evidence, too clear. Right now, you're using this preponderance of evidence, which is basically what she's saying. It's just everything, it's kind of this he said, she said. And it's not working out in cases like Joe was talking about, where there's so many other things to consider. So we're asking that you shift that from preponderance of evidence to clear and convincing evidence. And again, creating a tool to make sure that there is accessible data collection for these revocations, for appeals, violators in prison, et cetera, et cetera. Those things are really important to us. I also want to highlight Rule 27.04 for parole. Is that the one? Okay, cool. You already mentioned that. Is there anything I'm missing on hearings? And again, like, we wanted to really ensure that people have something to look forward to, some sort of way that their grievance is getting heard. November 15th.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we had a process standards meeting with Al Godfrey and Rebecca Holmes-Larson about these hearings and what we can do. And one of the things that we talked about was the appeal process. And right now, you know, the hearings themselves are supposed to be an appeal. Like the agent takes it before the hearing officer, and then the hearing officer makes the determination. Those are actually, right now, those are much fairer. They're very unfair, but they're much fairer than the actual, if you appeal the hearing itself, you appeal it right back to HRU. Rebecca and Al, who've been in the DOC for a minute, could think of one successful appeal in their entire time there. And we've already gotten some family members had their appeals sent back to them, and they clearly had read, the appeals had clearly not been read.
Right.
In terms of the response. So it's very clear that the HRU is not doing their job. That whether that's Rebecca Holmes-Larson, whether that's whoever's doing that, they're not doing their job. And that's what we're seeing again and again and again, is the HRU is not doing their job. That in fact, completely. That what is in place sometimes isn't adequate, and sometimes it's completely adequate, but the people who are running it are gaming it, and that's not okay. So that's I just wanted to push on that, particularly is that they have the job that they've been given, and they're not doing it.
So just to be clear about clear and convincing versus preponderance of evidence. I'm just going to be absolutely honest. I don't think that that's going to change any outcomes. And I say that because preponderance of evidence is the standard that the Supreme Court has established is a necessary factor. But when you begin to look at, and again, this is not trust me, this is not a defense of hearing officers, but there's two things that happen. It's a weighting of evidence, and it's a weighting of credibility. And so when you start to look at the standards of preponderance versus clear and convincing, that's a tough delineation, because it's not just about the weighting of the evidence, it's about the weighting of credibility. And that becomes a factor. And again, I'm not trying to minimize the credibility of people who are accused, but I'm just saying that that's an issue. I'm learning this because I've had to go and talk to legal counsel to kind of get a sense of what would that look like to have a different standard. That's why I'm answering this, because I've talked to the lawyers. When I look at the character witnesses themselves.
Hold on one second. Do you all understand? Could I see it? So I want to make sure everyone understands that we're not just saying this language, then we kind of move on to the next one.
Keep talking.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
So then on the character side, character for, I get it. these are not hearings about determining whether somebody's a good or bad person. I think what really should be happening is it should be grounded in the physical evidence that has been presented, and then I would just lastly say this: two things. One, appeal process is not grounded in the rules. And so we are now looking at exploring the policy side of that to see what policies can be changed. Because remember, rule changing takes a little bit of time because there's a hearing process. Policy we can enact. So I just kind of learned this, and so we were going to look at that and just see what that looks like. Now because that could be. And there's a number of ways that can happen.
I think the important thing about the character witness or the change of evidence is not necessarily about the facts, but because that's important, but often what's actually being determined is whether or not someone's a public safety risk. And so, that's actually.
Say a little bit more about what are you saying?
So in all these cases, whether it's CIP and otherwise, people are not supposed to be sent to prison unless they're a danger to the public. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening is it's like, okay, did you drink a beer? Okay, yes or no. Sometimes actually no, they didn't. But whether or not you drank a beer, sure, you might have evidence. But the more important evidence than the evidence that's being taken out is whether or not this person is safe to be in the community. And that's where I think a shift in evidence would matter, and also why it's really important that we have the ability for not only other people to see and sit in on hearings, but also to speak to the person's character and where they're at in their life. And that's part of why it's really damaging that these rights are not being followed, because that's kind of the key determination, even though we think about it like, okay, yeah, this is the charge, but the bigger picture is, are they public safety risk or not? And we're taking out our ability to assess that.
That impact statement that Curtis supports.
Right.
Ample supports.
Right.
That seems really important at that stage. It should say, what else is this impacting with this person says that.
And I agree on that. I support that. But I would say that actually should happen beforehand, frankly. And then second of all, I would just say that the true test is not about public safety threat. The true test is, are they in compliance with the conditions of their release? And that becomes, public safety becomes the broad overarching, but it's the conditions of their release. That's the evidence that's being tested.
But for example, in the CIP, it says you shouldn't be sent to prison unless they present a risk to the public. So there's conditions, and again, whether or not you violate them. But the determination to prison is.
But it does. But I get what you're saying. But that still doesn't absolve those other issues.
But they have a menu of responses.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's just what it's taken into because
I got a question. Who determines that the parole officer's evidence is credible? If everything needs to be 100% and these hearings are closed, if we can't be there trying to be a credibility for our, offender or whatever, who determines that their stuff is credible?
They have a right to legal counsel, right?
Speaking of an offender,
are incarcerated people.
Yes.
There you go. Okay.
These folks have a right to legal counsel, and the public defenders or private counsel is there. That is the representation.
And what happens when she fought better than any attorney he'd ever had in his life, but they still go with the deed?
I'm just saying that.
Or is something that all the lawyers say in these hearings are kangaroo courts?
I think that preponderance.
It seems like we got this generational conversation about change, and we got some immediate stuff that needs to take place, regarding change that people in this room who have authority to do. And it's like I feel like I'm just sitting in this meeting with this barberry bush just going around in circles when we got family members in here who have people that's incarcerated and this issue need to be addressed immediately. This is like emergency. We talking about people and their rights, and people who's being harmed.
Their lives,
We
yeah.
talking about abuse of, you know, the abuse of authority by the parole and probation officers, you know, and all this stuff that's going on. It's like, can we talk about how can we help these people get up out of here immediately?
Yep.
Instead of like, we're gonna do some legislation changes and we're gonna take it to the House and all this and we're gonna be able to help people in the future. It's like, we need some help like right now. Like, I don't wanna come to the next meeting and we have a new sheet and talking about, you know, where's the results? You know, I don't want to talk about November 15th or at the end of the year. It's some issues that's going on that's really detrimental to other people's health, even if they're incarcerated. Some abuse is going on. It's like, this ain't to be just kind of talked about. This got to be addressed.
So here, let me just say this, because I just really, despite the fact, I hear you, but I want to be really clear about something that and again, folks can feel frustrated. Never before has any administration been willing to do this. You can not like it or not, but that's the reality. And we're going to continue to work on it, whether we sit in this room or not. But we're going to do it in a way that is going to ultimately not result in other types of harm or problems. That's the end of the day what we got to do.
So the people that's locked up right now going through this process is going to basically be like martyrs.
Can I ask about that question? So you're saying you're gonna write some policy around HIU appeals?
Yeah,
Which sounds like a good idea, because right now they're, 100% fake. Are you gonna retroactively implement that? So that once you write the new policy, that people who currently were given a completely fake appeal have a chance to have a substantive appeal?
I don't know. Yeah, I haven't even.
That would be a way to do both of these things.
We haven't even looked at what the language would be. We haven't looked at anything. We just know that the appeal process is not grounded in rule.
No, totally. So I'm saying that I'm sure we'd be.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, we'd be willing to sit down and work with you on that if that was helpful. And also, that's an example where, as opposed to just saying we're going to look into the future, we can say now we've created this better policy and we're going to make sure that people who've been cheated out of any decent policy can appeal.
I don't think no one's just on the surface saying that, sweeping this stuff under the rug and saying that we're just looking to the future. What I'm going to say is that these issues were here a day ago. These issues were here a month ago. These issues were here a year ago. Our goal is to try to make sure that these issues don't continue to persist. And so that is why we are at the table. So to say that,
There's room to do both.
and everything that you are, and what I'm saying is that everything that you're saying is that we are definitely taking that into consideration to find a way to get there. And so, again, I can't stress enough, and as the commissioner said, we're going to continue to stay at this, whether that's in this room with you all or not, because this is a high priority for us. And
keep reiterating it, and we get it. We get it. But here we're trying to do work now. We don't need you to keep reaffirming it. We get it. We trust that.
But I'm trying to make sure you sincerely do, because you say you trust that, but then it's like, well, I hear you say that. No, whoa. All I'm gonna say is that I can be here as long as anybody else wants to. So the same thing. I'll let you just start talking. You just threw your 2 cents in, so I'm gonna say, yes, we are gonna continue we are gonna sit here to try to continue to try to meet your needs and to try to stay at this.
Wait a minute. Okay, before we move on, I was gonna say one thing that mirrored this guy over here. And it's about the preponderance of evidence talk, and it's kind of what he was stating, this guy, gentleman with the black hat. Before you stated that, I had written down that preponderance of evidence leads to false reports, abuse of power, which may and have probably led to great anger, assaults on staff, etc. And we've seen these things played out over the last, I don't know how long ago, but throughout the year. And then you mentioned preponderance of evidence is set by the Supreme Court.
It's said as sufficient, but the statute doesn't say it's necessary. So there's room in the statute to change the level of evidence, but the Supreme Court has said that preponderance of evidence meets the due process standard, so it's not illegal if it's preponderance of evidence. They're not saying that they have to use that.
Okay.
Supreme Court says it's actually the sum of evidence, which is less, but it's,
Okay.
it's,
So it's not illegal, but it's off.
Just real quick before we get to number 3, can you speak to monthly accessible data collections for revocations, appeals, HRU?
what we're trying to do is create a more of a summary database, a statistical database that would show just the numbers of appeals, then trying to delineate the types. But we have to, this is hand entry because we don't have an automated system that will do that. And that's, so we're trying to develop a framework where we're looking to, we have somebody who we are looking to move some support staff to be able to do that data entry. So that's, we're hoping to be able to make that move here in the next couple of weeks to begin doing that.
Number 3 is, despite being in on nonviolent crime and no crimes in 10 years, this is speaking to CIP releases. So right now they're getting sent back to prison for violations that don't quote unquote present a risk to the public. So we're just asking that, again, unless there's a clear convincing evidence of a risk to the public, that CIP releases are not treated that way. Same thing with their immediately on ISR, which has an incredibly low success rate. We're asking that the CIP reboot program be implemented, and then we're asking that CIP supervision is reduced to the already statutory mandate, drug and alcohol tests randomly on demand of supervising agent, et cetera, et cetera.
Can I just say one thing about that? Okay, my son talked to Paul Peterson, the one who created the boot camp program and stuff. They are thinking about doing the reboot program. But guess who's going to decide who gets to go to the reboot? This ISR. You are not putting my son's life in that man's hands.
A lot of these agents are to have too much.
The agents don't approve CIP.
I just said
They may not
that
approve CIP, but they-
this is a statutory problem. There may be some ways to look at this, but the statute around CIP provides a tremendous amount of restriction in terms of what has to happen. There may be some flexibility prior to revocation in terms of restructure and using a reboot, and that's what we've asked them to design, was that reboot program, and they have. And we're exploring what those numbers would look like and how that would run. And that would be something that supervisors or agents or HRU could look at, but it has to be prior to a determination of a violation. Because once there's a violation, it's governed by the statute.
Can I ask about once a CIP reboot program, if and when one is implemented, again, would that be something you'd be willing to retroactively apply to any of these folks that have been denied any sort of reboot?
I believe that the statute would prohibit retroactivity in that because there was a determination of a violation, I believe. And I think that this is one of those things where I'd get more specific legal guidance, but based on our read of the statute and that's what we would try and determine.
This is a basic question. It seems like there's also a really long waiting list to get into CIP in the first place. Is that an issue of like staffing and capacity? And if so, what steps are you taking to increase capacity?
So there has been capacity concerns, and we have put additional resources to that. Second thing that has happened is we're running up against some of the things around some of the mandatory minimum statutes, which even has been a problem. We've talked to the public defender's office about some prosecutors and judges are sentencing under a statute that actually requires a mandatory minimum. Mandatory minimum sentences can't come into CIP because you have to serve a mandatory minimum, and so CIP doesn't count for that, and that has been a problem. So there's been some challenges around this, and so they've been really focused. We had too few resources. They had to go back and look at all of the sentencing histories to make sure that there wasn't disqualifiers. We have now moved some other case managers and trained other case managers to do those reviews, and I think they will go considerably quicker. In fact, we have seen an uptick. I think the last two CIP classes, at least at Moose Lake and Provo, are full. So we're going to see the turn quicker.
Just as a follow-up on the CIP stuff, just you mentioned the statutory limits, I think it would be really useful if we meet again to have someone who is a statutory expert just to walk us collectively through that in a number of these issues. I think that would be really helpful so that we're looking at the same thing and we can all ask questions and problem solve on this stuff.
So on number 4 is on treatment, and it's interesting about mandatory minimums, because number 4 is the fault of the legislature. Once again, having faith in lawmakers can be troubling because they have put this problem on you. The DOC has been consistent since the 1970s that we cannot solve your substance abuse problem, and yet lawmakers have consistently put this problem on you. So we're thinking of ways where you can put it back in their lap, and there's been sheriffs in various counties that have said we're not going to take any more mentally ill patients. That's their only charge, is being mentally ill. Right? So I think there are steps the DOC can start taking. I'm going to use your own words. At the last meeting, custody is not effective for substance abuse. You know this. Everyone in the DOC knows this. Yet lawmakers continue to put this on you. Are there ways? And number 4, we can talk about all these different things that happen. Having that beer, relapsing, smoking a joint, and that stays with you for 30 days.
Right.
That you can form a culture change that says that is not a good reason to send someone back to prison. And the stats are just overwhelming on the number of people that come in to the DOC with substance abuse problems, and the numbers that are warehoused, often on technical violations. That does them no good. Yep. I think this is a point where the DOC can push back against legislatures who have just tried to foist this problem onto you, and that goes for mental health as well.
So I agree, thus the RFP out on the street to try because we want those providers that we can say, here's your 5 resources, you call whoever you want. These are providers that we know will turn a evaluation within 2 days, and whatever that recommendation is, you let us know, that's the restructure. That's what we want to support, because ultimately that's got to be the goal. And I think the more we push that, the more we have that happen, the better off we're going to be in terms of moving people forward. And again, we'll push with the agents to say, look, we want people to self-advocate more, when they find themselves in that position, and March, and we've had conversations. March is that treatment provider group, and they've done a lot of work with DHS and to make available, because that was another factor at one point. It does not appear to be a factor now. These folks would be eligible to access those streams and those services by selecting a provider to do that evaluation and turn it. And so we do believe that's the right thing to do.
There's 2 quick things. One, in the Anoka pilot project, which is working remarkably well, didn't they just tell the DO, you cannot send someone back? You have to find an alternative for someone.
Right.
And that seems like something we need to expand on. And then the second, to Brother Wayne's point about finding legitimate treatment programs, I think everyone that has loved ones that are in the system here can attest to there are far too many treatment programs that are abstinence only or are actually looking to use you guys to help them punish people. people, right?
Right.
Punish their way to sobriety
Right,
somehow, which we
which
know doesn't work, right?
Right.
The 12-step programs, for instance, work for some people, but not very many.
Right, I agree. And we're looking at, we even want to look at harm reduction stuff. We're looking at people who are doing, medically assisted treatment for opioid addiction. We're looking at things like the use of what's it called?
Detox.
No, there's,
Epinephrine,
no, CBD. We're looking at all kinds of things to try to do to be really creative around how we address this issue, and it's across the country is a factor. So we're there, and culturally responsive programs for Native American folks. I mean, African American folks, we want to try and do that, and that's why we're encouraging and want programs to access in and to dial in to become providers to access those funding streams that make it easier for people to get into those programs. And if we have to go out and have people to develop those programs or whatever, then I think we'll turn to like March and say, what is it going to take to develop programs that are going to meet the needs of these people? But I think there's many of them that are out there today, and they just have to get into respond to these RFPs.
And I don't want to belabor the point, but
We're
this
there.
does seem like something you're going to have to do, probably not by encouragement, but by decree, because the legislature's frankly cowardly on drugs, right? They have been, and they continue to be, and they will be forever. So this is something that you're going to have to decree. Failing a UA is not a good reason to send someone back to prison.
In fact, today, a single UA will not get you bounced. It can't.
But they, they put the UA with the, you were here.
Right.
We were at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting
Right.
when you were around the
I'm with you.
I'm with him, where they mount up, right?
I'm with you.
All clean UAs.
Yeah, I'm with
So
you.
this is a culture change that's gonna have to
Yeah,
come from
I agree.
top,
Yeah.
right?
Well, the problem is the violation, the principle that's define the definition of violation, like the roll off probation, all that CIP. The problem is that they can send them back with a violation of 130 UA, depending on who the probation officer is and how
He didn't even
what
have
kind of
one.
relationship he has with you. So it's like, also you gotta define that word, who has the authority over the word violation? And what is that?
And this is something we talked about with Al. We think you will have better parole officers and better probation officers when they shift away from that mindset of punishment and towards success. They will be better workers. Sending someone away might give them a short sugar high. Seeing someone succeed is going to be a fulfilling thing and better for them. I think that's why probation
Amen.
officers, yeah.
You're not gonna get an argument from us.
We're into making better workers that will actually work.
Can I go back to the mental health issue though, because that one is really important to me. Me too. The fact that I have had with my son so many problems with the halfway houses and the POs not willing to be accommodating to his mental health issues. I mean, his was a disability from the age 7 with the autism spectrum, with, so many other diagnoses, PTSD and everything. And no, we are not going to make accommodations if he cannot follow the conditions, then he can just go back. And I am glad that you believe that you can find somewhere where he can get an assessment within 48 hours, because at this point, it's always taken at least 8 weeks. Yeah.
Mental health, and I was really talking about CD, because you're right, and the availability of psychiatry and that kind of stuff is better than I.
Yes.
Brutally hard to get access.
Since we're on the subject of mental health and autism spectrum, do you also do it for your guards? The reason I'm asking because my son and Officer Kelly, who was one of the guardians in Stillwater, got into an argument, and Officer Kelly has admitted to different people that he has autism. He does not like to be touched. He does not. Things have to be done his way. And I guess he was having a bad day during the graduation, and him and my son got into an argument. My son is in a hole right now. But I was wondering, do you have anybody to deal with your officers who are on mental health spectrums?
We have in place support programming.
Okay, well, I wish somebody would talk to him. It's Officer Kelly. He works in the room, you know, like in the visitor's room when you get ready to come out, and then whatever that little thing is, I can't describe it, but Amani has expressed to the fact that some officers too, that he doesn't feel comfortable being alone with this person anymore. Just thought I'd bring that up since we're on this, you know, because it's not just inmates who have mental health issues, it's also some of the guys who have mental health. I mean, everybody has mental health issues. I do. Okay, so I'm not just saying it, but when you have a bad day, you take it out on somebody. Authority to put this person in a hole.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Yep.
Accountability.
Yes.
Accountability.
So we only wanted to go through the first 4 of I believe 7 proposed solutions. And so I would say it would be good to open it up to more feedback from you all, but also questions. I have a kind of specific question, and this may be a little theoretical to some. So I apologize in advance because I recognize that there's an urgent interest in getting things changed as soon as possible. But I guess my first question is about the antagonism that our constituents, the antagonistic relationships that our constituents experience from their supervising agents. And I'm bringing it up because y'all talk about shifting culture often. And what we know is that we can shift culture within an institution, within the DOC, through legislative acts, through making new rules, and also through executive policy. What I'm wondering is, what do y'all know, based on the information you have access to, about why has y'all's institution become so antagonistic towards people who are on supervised release? And what are some of the mechanisms that you have now to reduce the level of antagonism that our constituents are experiencing?
I mean, that's almost it's a little bit of a question, like when did you stop beating your wife? Because there's no good answer for that. There is as you know, we've talked about this before. We have agents that work for the Department of Corrections. We have agents that work for county. We control some purse strings and establish some policies around, in particular, around Community Corrections Act counties. But we are not the employer, nor do we have direct oversight, and nor can we sanction or take action against any particular agent. That falls well underneath the purview of the hiring authority, which in that case would be the county. It is the county. If it's our agent, it's our agent. And one of the things that we're interested in is beginning to look at the data around who's doing what. In other words, are there which agents are driving the majority of violations, whatever it may be, so that we begin to really kind of ferret it out. Because what ends up happening, whether we agree or not, we look at incidents as incidents, but there's not been a history of looking at the totality over time. And so I think when you really look at patterns, that's where you begin to see problems. We're also really interested in because we also know that this is, while it affects everyone, there has been disproportionate impact on communities of color. We recognize that and take that seriously as well. So I think your question's a good one. It's complex in the sense that we control our folks, and we're asking supervisors. I want Al and supervisors to begin to, to talk about how do we know, and are there patterns and trends to these violations, and if there are, what is being done? But that's really where it sits right now.
And what about with regards to hearings officers, or I guess they would call it administrative officers? These are employees of the DOC, correct?
Yep.
And so, I mean, definitely we control the purse strings of those staff members. But also, how did it come to be that hearings officers would not read appeals, not allow evidence to be brought in, not allow character witnesses? How did it come to be that hearings officers would wholeheartedly accept the preponderance of evidence that was provided by a parole officer? How did it come to be that hearings officers would push for people who have been revocated to sign guilty pleas? How did that culture come to exist, and what powers would you have to change that?
Remember, like it or not, it is due process, and that there is legal representation provided to the people who are there. I'm not defending the hearing officers, but I am saying that that it is not without representation.
So although they can have representation, if your employees are allowed to determine whether or not witnesses can enter the room.
Right.
And that is not, as you said, it's not a matter of statute. Why is it that you, or the highest ranking member of the institution, can't push for that to change immediately?
So can I just, okay. So one thing I just, in general, want to remind everyone is that we're here because the commissioner is willing to be here, and he's been here for 9 months. And so he actually recognizes the things that you are bringing up. And so some of the questions that you ask about why some of those things and how it was created, recognizing that there needs to be a significant change is a top priority. And so sometimes some of those questions are a little bit hard to answer. And so I just want to remember that piece of it, that I think that we all are here for that exact reason, to try to answer those questions.
And history is going to be well beyond some of us. That does not relieve the burden of trying to address this and unravel it.
Right, so let's look at the policy around it, right?
Yep.
And so you're saying that yes, the policy meets due process standard according to the Supreme Court, but that doesn't mean that the policy can't be changed.
Right, I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying that when we have policy, we have longstanding practice. There are requirements around restructures that have to happen. Now, we can argue about whether or not they're good restructures, but there's requirements around that prior to a revocation. So it's, and there has been a significant change by the virtue of the fact that we have 400 to 500 less people in on revocations today. So that doesn't mean that there isn't more we can do.
Can we go back? I don't think you ever answered his question.
Why can't you change it?
Yeah, why can't you?
Yeah, what are some of the obstacles that are preventing you from changing the policy of your hearings officers?
So but the policies are grounded first of all, they're grounded in rules. So the rules, we could do a rule rewrite. But if we do a rule rewrite, we're talking about a year plus. It's not legislative, it's rules. So we can create the rules, but it has to go through a public process and input and all that kind of stuff. So that's where it's now, we can look at things like appeal. We also have to remember that the minute you start to take, you step back from, due process, and then Paul Schnell says, Kurt Schlenkerl is now the guy who's going to look at appeals, and he's going to do it based on his subjective kind of criteria. We have a problem, because he can't use a subjective criteria to evaluate that situation because it was grounded in a preponderance and based upon a hearing officer. The reason the Supreme Court came back and validated this process was not because it necessarily thought this was a great system. It was because they said, look, we have to apply a basic standard for these internal hearing processes, and it rose to their kind of constitutional level. I'm not suggesting that's a good place.
So just to make sure that we're hearing you right, what you're saying is that based on the rulings of the Supreme Court and the standards for due process, right, and as well as preponderance of evidence, the hearing officers who work for the DOC generally, but specifically in Minnesota, can implement due process in the ways that they see fit, which is also subjective. Meaning that a hearing officer can determine whether or not they will open up the hearing room for witnesses. The hearing officer can determine at their own subjective level or based on the preponderance of evidence provided by a probation officer whether or not they will allow additional evidence, and they can also decide on whether or not they will force someone to sign a guilty plea.
You can't force someone to sign a guilty plea, but there are, well, I'm just telling you that there are rules, and that's what's there. So you can look at the rules, and the answer to those questions are in the rules.
But they can lead with sign this guilty plea in exchange for X, Y, Z. They can make that bargain with somebody.
Yeah, they with their legal representation.
So they can
absolutely.
They can implement their own process at the individual level.
All of that is part of policy as far as that hearing goes. Yeah, you're exactly right with, they can allow, it says that you're gonna call for witnesses and all your evidence can be put forth, and yet it doesn't. Then the hearing officer just shuts you down, even though it is part of the policy that you're allowed to do this. And so maybe you check a certain box because it fits that you're gonna give an explanation. But then you're completely shut out and you don't get that. So that's the part of the policy that has to change to make a difference.
Yes. So for example, is the specific policy, is it a rule, is it a policy that if you sign a guilty with explanation, that you are not allowed to have witnesses?
No.
That's how it's set up. So we've been told that that's the case. Rebecca Holmes-Larson told us that basically if you sign guilty with explanation in the current process, you waive all your rights. And so what I'm asking is that based in a rule or a policy? It's not based in a statute.
I know it's not based in a statute.
So
I don't know the answer.
So again, maybe just like we should do a statutory review at some point, we could do a rule review about relevant things.
What you're talking about there is policy. It's in the policy that you get to select. But what they don't tell you, they don't tell you though that they're gonna cut you off no matter which box you expect to give an explanation when you put guilty with an explanation because you don't understand what that means. And then they immediately cut you off and you're done. Even with private counsel, a lot of money. 4-minute hearing, 4 minutes, nothing, no one, nothing. All the money we spent on private counsel went out the window. So you don't, even though the policy seems to be right, it's not being implemented properly, is my beef on it.
So let me let's walk that through. It's guilty with explanation, right?
One of the selections.
Right. So let's say they check guilty with explanation. And this is the crux of this, right? Look at the CIP statute. And that creates the problem right there. Because once that happens, there's a material violation, which then prompts an action. That prompts an action that that ultimately results in the violation. So the plea of guilty, regardless of explanation, like it or not, is in fact a material violation, and a material violation under CIP results in return and revocation.
So even the attorneys don't understand that. So how could you possibly expect, or not how could anyone possibly expect just an inmate without representation to understand it? So that isn't clear at all. That isn't clear at all. And that, therein lies the problem.
Is this only for CIP or is this for all of
That's
it?
CIP.
No, but it's
The use of that
interpretation of
right.
material
Right.
violation.
Right.
In other cases, that wouldn't apply. But I think again, it'd be great to go through the statute, because again, there's this thing that people in CIP shouldn't be sent to prison unless they present a risk to the public. So I don't know, I mean, again, it'd be just nice to dig into that and look at that together to make sure that,
Well, what defines risk?
bingo.
In my case.
And that's why witnesses and evidence seem so important. Also, I mean, what Pam's pointing out is that certainly we could change the policy about how these things are explained. And that seems really important to, and it's pretty typical in most court cases that you explained how the process works before you plead to something. And that's not being done.
Yeah, typically you have an attorney who is going to tell you what you're forfeiting, but I don't disagree. In the spirit of fair play, you should know what
So
you're.
you think we can, is that a change we could look at maybe?
Yeah, I don't have to know the process, so I have to learn that part of it, what that would look like, yeah.
So again, maybe we could bring such a person to the next meeting to make sure that we all agree. I mean, we're not experts at this either, right?
If you bring that person, we'll bring snacks.
No need.
Well, we're gonna have snacks this time.
We can put the game on the screen. Catch the kickoff.
Just a quick question, guys. Can you, because you guys been meeting for 9 months, right?
So we met first in February, but we've been really meeting since July.
Okay, since July, do you have the ability to put together a spreadsheet of what took place since July? You know what I'm saying, with these meetings for the next meeting? What results?
Want to catch up?
Yes, so far there hasn't been, and maybe that's something good to go through right now. Because it seems like there might be some things that we can say, okay, so for example, just to go through this it sounds like you said that we'll have a warrant process by the end of the year.
That's what we're looking at to try and.
Goal timeline. It sounds like we'll have a HIU appeals process. Do you have a goal timeline for that?
I mean, I just learned about some of this stuff today, so I don't know, or I heard about it on Monday, but I just don't know exactly what's all going to be involved, if the lawyers will tell me.
Okay. It looks like on the HIU stuff, alerting people to their rights is something that we should probably add. Is there something, do you think that's something that we could put a goal timeline on?
Curtis can talk to, he oversees that HR, you can talk to them about what that would look like even.
I'll follow up with Rebecca in regard to that and look to flesh that out.
And is that something that you think could happen, I mean, in a month we could have a change on that? I mean, it seems pretty simple, maybe, I mean, it seems really simple to just make sure that people know what their pleading means.
Yeah, also.
Outside of council, making sure that they know what that means, I'm sure that we can discuss that and figure out if there's a mechanism outside of that that's going to help to make that more efficient. Absolutely.
Also, if we drafted like a know your rights for the HRU process, can we send that to you? For
Absolutely.
All right, great. So a rights alert, that sounds great. Both sides of the thing. Talked about evidence. It sounds like your lawyer doesn't seem like that's very important. Love to learn more about that, but it doesn't seem like there's movement there. The data stuff, we talked about coming up with a summary database. Do you have any sense of timeline on that?
We're just moving this person, we have to talk to, there's assignments of some duties there and what that's gonna be, but she's not even in the unit yet, so
Can I
hopefully soon in the next week or two, she'll be in there.
Okay. Can I encourage that the actual filing of the steps of the process go into that database? Because I think, so for example, if I'm a parole officer and I say I'm violating someone, and I fill out a form, it goes in the database, or I'm revoking someone, I fill out that form, it goes in the database, or I'm an HIU officer, I've made a decision, and my paperwork goes into the database. Because right now they have to do paperwork on every step of this process. So if we could build that paperwork into the database, then we can actually summarize stuff. Well, right now, it's like Rebecca literally told me that they don't keep a record of appeals, even though we know no one wins them, because then they have data. And so it'd be really great if...
You mean the actual reports themselves?
No, not the reports, but so for example, you could say, you have to put in, in the form, were they restructured or were they revoked? Why, what was the cause of that? You could have a set of 30 categories of why they were revoked. This could go along with our warrant tool, like Paul's been mentioning. Like did they, just whatever, just a summary, so not the actual confidential data, but just
like stuff that can be maybe drawn on the aggregate.
The demographics,
okay.
you know what I mean? This type of stuff, just so that again, we're using people's energy they already have to expend to have an outcome that we can all use and track.
I'll look at that. I'll make sure, I'll look at that and run it by.
It's not as easy as that.
It's gonna be tricky.
We're building a database that's separate, and so to use that, those forms will not go into that.
I could do it with a Google form, but we could probably find a better solution.
Do you need a volunteer to help you with the database structure? That would be me, I'm an architect.
Volunteer also. Volunteer.
Let's see, that's number 2. Number 3, we've heard the reboot is coming. Do we have a sense of timeline on that?
We have, the reboot is designed, and it's now a question of starting points and how many people, and because it's just what does that look like? And then again, there can't be a material violation. It has to be a part of what's really a restructure, because once that determination is made, then the only option you have is return.
Unless there's some kind of appeal on that. But okay, so you're looking at a reboot, you're not sure about timeframe? Okay. This reduction of the CIP supervision mandate, we didn't really go into that, but that seems like the statute's pretty clear, and it seems pretty clear we're going far beyond that at the moment. That's 3B. Yeah, I don't know. We didn't talk about that, so maybe just flag that for a future thing, but that seems.
We can talk about it. I think, that some of the variation is built upon, kind of risk determinations and some of that kind of stuff, and so we want to look at all of that. That's one of our goals.
Sorry, Joe, can I finish? Sorry, no bad. And then the treatment stuff, it seems like there's pretty broad agreement.
Right.
And you mentioned basically that you're looking to line up service providers.
The RFP is out on the street now. It's out there now.
And then, but it might be good to look at those specific things that were identified as important from folks going through it, in terms of like sending people to prison for treatment, also being sent to prison for treatment when it's not available so that they sit, also being sent to prison for treatment and then they sit and then their violation expires, but they hold them in prison because they haven't met their treatment mandate, so then they get violated for another year upon another year, which is really crazy. So maybe looking at that, and then also if someone fails treatment, right now we're sending people to prison to sit to wait for a treatment bed, even if they're supposed to go back and do treatment in the community. So just holding people in the community under house arrest or under some other function seems like a useful way of reducing costs and keeping people in the least restrictive environment. So again, maybe we can dig deeper into those. But it's good that it seems like we have a lot of philosophical agreement on both warrants and treatment. So
I don't know. Again, this is where relying on the legislature. We were just told today that your excellent program in Elko with mental health, you asked for 2 extra probation officers to help with that program, to alternatives to incarceration. Our friend from Maple Grove blocked 2 extra probation officers that would keep people out. If he's going to block everything, then it's up to us, right?
No, I get it.
So I guess the last thing before we move on from this section is just setting the next meeting, maybe dig into more of these things, and maybe bringing statutory experts or whoever can kind of make sure we're all on the same page, so we're looking at the same pizza and we can figure out, what we can do and what we can't do.
Have we covered the good time that they've already spent, and then when they violate, they should start back from scratch?
We haven't covered that, that needs to be on the list, but that's not on the list right now, but that seems.
That's on CIP you're talking about?
Yes.
Statutory too, but that needs to change.
That's a statutory item.
It seems,
It's a long
it
term.
seems unfair to me.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
So we're going to disagree.
I think that goes beyond CIP too.
They'd set up my probation so that if I had a job, I would be violating, and if I didn't have a job, I was violating.
Yes, that sounds like a lot of things in there.
And instead, they took 30,000 in cash and said, well, then you're okay. Go buy now.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Sure, I'll just,
Wow.
well, just, before we set the next one, one thing we've been talking about at our meetings when we meet with each other, and again, this is, I believe in your sincerity, I believe in Governor Wall's sincerity, I believe in all of your sincerity, however, you are in charge of a giant bureaucracy. And there seems to be a pattern of people who are either incarcerated or out on supervision that are disappearing. And
When they come.
when they come to this meeting or when they're working with us, and if I thought I was making life worse for people who are incarcerated who already have very little control over their lives, I would quit this group tomorrow. Can you promise to us that no one is being retaliated against for sharing their thoughts? And part of the strength of this group is that people are sharing their thoughts. I mean, we went to Senator Chamberlain only because a person who was incarcerated said, go meet with Senator Chamberlain, he has some really good ideas. That's a real strength of this group. So we just love to hear from you that that is not happening. Otherwise, we're not going to do this if we're making life worse for people on the inside.
Trust me, I don't even know who his people's agents are. I don't know who's on, who's not on. And there is no, trust me, I would like to be in a spot where there's no retaliation going on, that I have any knowledge, I mean, none.
Is there a way that people can get hold to you in all of you about retaliation of what happens to them? Because this is like, there was a news conference on Angela, can't think of her last name. Angela Hooks, and she's in the hole because someone told me what had happened. She's supposed to get back in the CIP program, and I guess on her, one of the nurses kept on coming in. I guess what happened, they got upset about the news conference. Yeah, the nurse got upset, and so now she's in the hole. And so we're wondering about that retaliation. I mean, how can they, is there a way that when something happens that we can report to you guys about it and let you know what's happening, and on your people below you? And, I mean, just like you said, you don't know what's going on, but it is coming out though.
Yeah.
So you can certainly let us know. I don't know about anything about the circumstances of this deal at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, yeah.
And I couldn't talk about them here anyway.
If we have evidence that people who've been in this room on your side are probably instituting retaliation, would that be helpful?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to act upon that if we have?
If there's evidence that there's retaliation, hell yeah.
Okay, because there appears
To what level will you go on that?
Well, I mean, we have evidence standards too.
No, I mean, I've got evidence of some extreme criminal activity within the government. I got this was a little extreme.
I'm about to give you Keith Ellis's number.
Already spoke to Keith about it, but Keith didn't give a shit back then. He didn't care.
So David, can I just clarify? So there's 4 people in this room. Assistant Commissioner Karpowitz, myself, Curtis, and the Commissioner.
Yes.
So your question was, is anyone in this room retaliated after leaving this room? Was that your question?
So the last meeting,
I wasn't at the
believe
last
some
meeting.
people, well, yes.
So I'm just
there was
asking.
retaliation that happened, yes, for someone who was in this room by someone who was in this room, we believe. So anyway, we need to run it through everyone. We don't want to.
Yep. Give us the evidence, Louis, and we'll look at it.
But it's concerning. I think there's a lot of question about accountability for HRU in general in this process. So I think that this is perhaps another instance of that. Cool. It seems like do we want to set a next meeting? Should we set a next meeting? It seems like there's a lot of details to talk to on a lot of this stuff, and it'd be useful to kind of have a technical meeting, really, to kind of dig into these areas around warrants and appeals and CIP and treatment. And seems like we don't need as much dog and pony, and we need more just like whoever can, and that's been on us too, don't get me wrong. So I don't know, like a week and a half.
Oh, we can't do a week, because then you know what? Then we'll come in. We gotta give us.
You just came
I would
back
rather come
2 weeks.
I would rather come though, honestly, because I don't want. And again, and I said I don't want this to feel like we just come back and we haven't had an opportunity to get anything done. Then it kind of I think that leads to some of the frustration that you all have.
I'm just saying it'd be nice if some of those people who are the statutory experts could be here and we could just talk through stuff. You know what I mean? Because like some of it is like all of us are referring to someone out there, and that seems like let's just bring them in here. Yeah. And again, let's get into the nitty gritty of it. You know what I mean? It seems like the more we're in that, we're finding agreement, and the more we're not, we're.
So I would also I would encourage you as you look to do concrete stuff, because I think one of the things we talked about was the statutory language changes. I really would encourage you to dig into those statutes and suggest language, so that, because I think that's helpful for us to make sure that we're doing that, because that's got to be part of this fix. It has to be.
Yeah, and we have to add actual bills. If we're going to meet with legislators, we have to. Right. They're not patient enough to listen to us talk.
No, they want bills. And I think we have done we've started just doing some really, the framing up what elements of the drafting would be. We have not gone to the reviser and asked for bill drafts yet. Well, we will be doing that probably in late November or December. We will be doing the actual drafting so that they're ready to go and we can start to meet with legislators about this.
Should we meet with Ms. Khan for that?
Yeah, we can, and we'll get you connected in terms of that.
Okay. Also, I mean, if we're thinking legislatively or long-term changes, those are things, everything in here we thought could be done without legislative change. We specifically identified things that we thought were doable through policy change. And these are kind of the ones that we're like,
focus on rules as well, because some of these things are rules, and that is not as easy.
Can you send us a list of rules?
Or where are they published? They're on the website.
It's rules with a capital R.
Okay. Well, we should look through them apparently, because they don't.
Jay, you got the brother behind you, keep raising.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
All right, one thing I was going to mention, because now you're mentioning bills, I was going to mention that, are we going to be part of the process of also reviewing bill? And I mean, I was wondering, my main question was, would it be best if it's many small bills or one big bill? I mean, what's going to be the most effective process? And
it's a great question. I think sometimes small bills are better because people may say they can kill the whole bill because they don't like one provision of it. And so sometimes small fixes, technical fixes or language fixes are actually better, so that you don't have the whole thing get killed.
And I'm gonna sneak in and piggyback off this question because it's been on my mind about this two-piece, the short term and medium term. I was wondering, like, for next meeting, if we can break this down a little more to more bite-sized pieces where we can get some results to keep people motivated. Like, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what can happen right now. What does the Department of Corrections or Commissioner have authority to make changes in right now instead of this long, drawn out? I think we just biting off little pieces throughout the session instead of just focusing in on what can happen right now. Let's get those things done and move on to the next longer term. That'll keep the people engaged and motivated to start seeing some results, even if it's just small. Even if two people just get released because of us meeting.
Sounds like warrants, appeals.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to break this down to more bite-sized, immediate, instead of just having it all come to the table at one time all the time.
So, meeting?
That's just a suggestion.
I guess.
2 weeks.
It's like 2 weeks is not gonna happen. We're not gonna be there.
Because like Curtis talked about, the sooner we come together and then something doesn't happen, then we come here and nothing happens. And so there's a number of things that we ultimately agree and have already said. I mean, they have to get with the warrants and all of those. I mean, we're at the end of the year by the time some of that stuff happens. So there is gonna be no action in 2 weeks.
Wayne?
Wayne. Yep, already. I was writing it down, I was just gonna, for my closing in this, I was gonna say, when somebody is empowered positively, they begin to make a powerful, positive, impactful change in their lives and in their communities. And I think that's one of the focuses we should input.
I want to bring up something also. At the last meeting, somebody mentioned about slavery in the prisons, and people weren't quite sure about it. But anyway, the 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, says neither slavery or involuntary servitude except as a punishment for a crime. And that is still in the 13th Amendment now in the United States. And I thought I'd pass this to you guys in case you wanted to. And I would like to see it amended personally. If there's a way to get it in the legislation to get it taken out of the 13th Amendment, because it is in there. Prisons are basically in slavery. That's why you have people working for minimum, like 13, 14, 50 cents an hour, while these big corporations are making a lot of money.
Anderson windows, upholstery,
Right.
welding.
And that's a congressional change at the US level.
And that's what it is. And so slavery does exist in the prison.
That's right.
So,
On the flip side, what the rules should block you up.
in terms of the next meeting, we're starting to develop what our ground game is in terms of which counties we go to knock on doors and start to build up political will to support some of the legislative, but also it sounds like some of the county level changes that need to happen. And so I think what would be useful is if, even though we can't meet with y'all because y'all are working on some higher level policy that takes more time, if we could meet in the next 2 weeks with, say, Ms. Khan, possibly Grant Dewey, some of the people from the process.
But it seems like particularly the
Process standards folks.
So Al and Rebecca,
Mm-hmm.
that seems like they were the ones who were gonna work on the warrant stuff, am I wrong?
So at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's gonna boil down to me making the thing happen. And so I think, and the deputies, and I think that's where we sit and we can do that. But I don't, they're not gonna pull that trigger to move us stuff forward. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what we're asking. We're not asking for people to pull the trigger on anything. We're asking for people who are in positions of knowledge to come and advise us on how to structure our community engagement strategy. So that's why we want to meet with those specific people.
And specifically, like, what's, again, the nitty gritty to figure it out. And again, it'd have to run through you, because nothing gets approved with the DOC unless it goes to the commissioner. This is how it works.
That's what they say.
Well, I mean, you must sign like the president, but in any case,
No, I don't delegated authority.
No, what I would say to that is I have no problem going back, though. I also don't want to commit people without having them have the opportunity to look at their schedule and their time. So I'll go back to them and see what see what their schedule and their time is, and then because I want to take their input. I don't think that'd be fair to speak for them and take their input, and then I can follow up with you.
I didn't get to read that. Okay. You can read it, you don't have to write it down if you want.
And you'll reach out to them if you want. I mean, again, there was a process standards working group that got created 8 weeks ago now, and that we had a couple of meetings as part of that. That's part of where the warrant stuff came from, I think, so I could be wrong. So it seems like just continuing that subgroup could be useful. If you're okay with that, you're their bosses. and you're their boss's boss. So what is a relevant timeframe then for like a next meeting that seems appropriate to y'all?
With us all involved?
Yeah.
I would say probably sometime after the first of the year.
That's way far from now. That's like 3 months away.
How about the first week of December, so that we can check in about where you are with some of the, what's in the pipeline?
We'll have a sense of some of the statute stuff, probably, maybe, by then. At least you'll have a framework.
Legislation starts in February, right?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah,
don't
it's a
wait-
short session this year, yeah.
We don't want to wait too long for that.
Right. Yeah, and I sense you all's frustration. I don't like not being able to come here and just be able to say that these are the solutions that we are able to get, because I know the process. So that's all I'm trying to avoid, is to have you all come in with your time taken out of the night to come here, and then I can't sit here and say, well, this policy is now ready to be changed. So that's what I'm trying to think about, so I can.
Well, it makes sense to have smaller problem-solving meetings, and then to build towards a bigger launch or a bigger next whatever meeting. So, I think it sounds, regardless, hopefully we can set up a smaller problem-solving meeting shorter term, and then, first week of December is 6 weeks from now. It's a long time. I don't.
David, it's November, like next week.
Yeah, it's 6 weeks.
Time is flying.
Well, I know, but.
You got holidays in there, you got a whole bunch of stuff going on in there. And like I said, I'm just trying to be considerate enough to be able to come and give you all actually, hopefully, some
That's still
results.
6 weeks, the first week of December, right?
Let's do 6 weeks, just to kind of talk. We'll talk a little bit about some of the legislative policy stuff that being framed up, so that at least we know where that is. We're going to be doing outreach and community engagement around some of this stuff anyway, some of this bill language, just to see, and I think it makes some sense. At least talk about what we kind of know at that stage of the game.
Yeah, I know we have things coming up like holidays and stuff, but I know she's worried about her son's holiday. Everybody's worried about their loved one's holiday on the inside.
Could you also inform your staff, for the ones who are not here and the ones who are here, to come to this meeting, so we can all see each other, see everybody, say hello, and we're done?
To the extent that we can do that, to hold people over. And I think if we talk the first week in December, we can give people some notice. They're around.
Should we do the Wednesday or the Thursday that week, or the Monday?
Isn't the 5th the St. Nicholas Day?
Yeah, the 5th is a Thursday.
Make sure you acknowledge the young
Nope, that should be this, not that.
Huh?
I'm sorry. The last word should be this, not that.
December 5th?
December 5th?
That's a Thursday?
Thursday.
Same time.
December 5th?
Is 6 okay?
Rush hour was fun today. What day is December 5th? Thursday.
It's not gonna be too bad, rush hour.
The 3rd and the 4th. So it's almost like What about the other files?
I can't even read my handwriting. I never got to finish.
It looks like it might be real difficult to write with that really skinny.
It's a really tiny thing, yeah, it is. But I never got to finish it because I was writing it as Suzuki. I got my name. It just popped into my head to write it.
I don't understand what goes on, but I don't know where it fits.
The bills.
Let's show some. Just.
I just wanted to know when you write.
All right, the 5th it is.
What time is it?
Do we say what time?
At the same time, I assume. Oh,
We was talking about rush hour at 6, and snow at 6.
Five.
Oh, December's gonna snow, huh?
December.
It might snow.
No, not in Minnesota.
Can we hold up to January? I feel like the snow.
January's cold.
If you don't want snow, then I'll see you in April. I mean, come on now.
No, we already covered that.
I know, it wasn't my request. Wasn't my request.
So,
Yes, yeah, there's two at least. So, does 6 o'clock on that Thursday work?
Yeah, that's fine.
You don't like 5:30?
I just never got,
We had some rush hour complaints in this little hub
Oh,
over here,
okay.
sorry.
It's all right.
Great, so Ms. Sharice and then Ms. Kim, and then we'll see. if-
I'll go last.
Wayne, yeah, hey.
My question is, when you write a letter to the commissioner, do the commissioner himself read the letters, or is it just?
A staff person? That's what she's,
I would say it's a combination of both.
Mostly no. But because we get, I don't know, maybe
With the amount of mail that comes to these offices,
50,
so,
50
yeah.
a day. And so they get assigned to people, they get assigned to people throughout the agency.
You do kites still?
No, I mean, they get assigned to people throughout, so I don't.
Okay, I'll let you know.
And just a reminder, people will get faster responses if they follow the chain of command and who is the best person to answer that question and be able to provide that they actually did that, because I read all of that. So when it comes, I go back through and I hold people accountable for the answers that they respond to. So if you write a letter or a kite to the commissioner's office, it will get sent back down, and then that time starts over again. So they need to be able to, and I was in a facility for 18, 7, and 4, we'll just say 29 years. And that's plain and simple how it is. You have access to all of those people every day. And so I'm just trying to be helpful if people want quick responses. That is.
Yeah, I wrote the letter myself.
Okay.
That's why I was asking.
Okay,
But
perfect.
I wrote the letter to the commissioner.
Okay. And so it probably did get read and sent to whomever is in the best position to answer it, who would have that direct information, and then it comes back down here to be reviewed afterwards. Or at least, seen by us afterwards.
Speaking of.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Speaking of that, we did ask about a number of CIP folks last meeting. You said you looked into. Can you have any report on that?
So I have to speak in the broadest of terms, but they are all being re-reviewed and would be, if they meet the statutory kind of requirements and the medical requirements, they're in.
And that's the other thing that we don't talk broadly about, and that we're not going to be able to talk in great detail about, but remember there is a medical component to all of that as well. And that has also been and continues to be reviewed, and we've had some really good meetings with the physical therapist and trying to get people, the success rate and the amount of physical health that is seen in these programs is immense. And I think it's really to everyone's benefit, but that's something that we can't ever really talk in detail about.
So the statutory that we got back from you guys, their case does not fall into that 244.17, and so we're kind of confused about that.
Can I just catch you afterwards really quick? So I can-
Okay.
Kim and then Wayne and then you.
If this here again then too, I'm assuming, or you did read my email that I sent you. And I don't know if I misunderstood you earlier, but when I talked to you on my first meeting here, you talked to me about my email and told me about the reboot, the CIP reboot. And you made it sound like anybody who is incarcerated right now is a part of that. But I think I heard you earlier say that they're not now. Did I misunderstand?
Yeah, so if the challenge is because of the legal status of the material violation requirement, which is in statute, it creates a retroactivity issue where we can't go back and reboot people because the statutory thing is met. Now they can, what we have done is allowed people to reapply that come through, and we're even looking at that as if people who've gone back and then reapplied, is there some, depending upon fitness and all those types of things, are there things we can do to even shorten some of that? But that hasn't been designed yet. That's because, again, this is grounded in Minnesota law, and so that creates challenges for us.
Okay, and I understand that, but I know when you brought it up to me, you said the reason for this reboot was because you didn't even think it was right for anybody being reincarcerated.
I don't.
Having to reapply again.
I don't, but I don't, when push comes to shove, the law is what's causing the problem. Now,
Is there an appeal process in CIP? I mean, also appeals to the state treasurer?
so
Bless you.
it would reach you, but the statutory problem is that much more difficult.
I understand that. Okay. Wayne had something?
And thanks, Lucas. What I was gonna say, when I read that little statement earlier, I was still writing it when my name got yelled out, so I didn't get to finish my last part. So I just want to reread it really quick.
It's gonna be positive.
It's gonna be positive.
It is gonna be positive. I wrote it down.
So I'll read what I said. When somebody is empowered positively, they begin to make a powerful, positive, impactful change in their lives and their communities. And they said, right now, the current system does not allow for this. And this is part of the fight, I think, that we're fighting for.
I was going to ask about the kites. And is there a way to get like a citizens review board for that? Because I've been hearing the chain of command inside the institution. It's like they're basically one-sided. And is there a way, like for instance, the ombudsman staff, for instance, could they be part of the citizens review board?
The ombudsman, by statute, will have full access to everything, with unfettered access to everything.
The kites also?
Kites, records, medical records, they have access to everything.
Yeah, I would like to see some of the kites go outside the prison. Matter of fact, all of the kites go outside the prison.
Is there more than one ombudsman, or is it just one?
There's an ombudsperson or ombudsman who is being hired, and then there will be four staff people, 4 investigators that will work.
Prisons?
And that, it's a starting point, it's a starting point, for it began.
It's not in the budget.
That's true.
You had mentioned, Commissioner, that you talked to Roxanne afterward, so back to that. Okay, thank you. I actually am just gonna take a moment then to say too, I think, as I've been listening, one of the things that has come up is culture change quite a bit, and as someone in a position of authority, as I myself have been at many times, sometimes you have the opportunity to change a culture when you can rally and get a lot of people and get feedback asked. It's kind of like you're asking permission for it. And then there's times too when culture change requires leadership to make decisions and make changes. And I guess my encouragement to you would be where you can in this next 6 weeks, where you can make those stands, to make those decisions that may be the decisions that you're having to make almost alone in some ways, but are the right thing to do. I would just encourage you to.
I greatly appreciate that. I think one of the things that we're mindful of is that you can look at lots of points in history, and I've kind of alluded to this before, where change has been directed, and then what ended up happening was this feeling of retaliation. In other words, the systems kind of went deeper, and the pushback or the response was actually worse. And that's one of the things we're really mindful of, is how do we make sure that it is broad, and that we ultimately don't create a situation that actually makes it worse. And as hard as that may be to imagine, but that's a concern. So I hear you, and I really appreciate that.
So one of the things, just so everyone knows, is that between the three of us and Josh and Marcus, the chief of staff and the assistant commissioner, have been out to the facilities, the field offices, the entire state from top, bottom, side to side, and have been speaking these words to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our staff. We have 4,300 staff, and we have been giving face-to-face time, as much time as we, spend with all of you and listening and providing that feedback. So those kinds of things that you're talking about are happening because we believe it is the best route to change. But I don't think that you have somebody sitting here that is afraid of that one make a decision, but it's the part about it's important for everybody, for everyone to come along and want to come along.
You play a role in that, an important role. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say one thing, and I understand that all of you are new. You said 9 months. That is a very short time.
This is 3 weeks. 3 weeks
Yes.
today.
Yes.
All right, 3 weeks. I'm 29 years. Okay, I'm the old one.